Welcome back to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. Gary, it's a pleasure to have you back on the show. I think this is around your fifth time on. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good, Robbie. It's always good to talk to you.
Well, it's always good to talk about the Kennedy assassination. It seems like that's always the conversations we usually get into. Do you have any other hobbies?
Yeah, I have lots of hobbies. I play in a band, um,
What kind of music you play?
all kinds of music. Uh, I I collect antique radios.
That's interesting.
Yeah, they're over there. I can't, I can't turn the computer around, but
Why antique radios?
I don't know. I just got into it. One day I went to the library. This was 30 years ago, and got some old radio shows on tapes. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool to play one through an old radio, Yeah. And I went to an auction and bought a radio, an old radio from the 30s or 40s. And I just kind of then it went, I started finding out more about them, and uh, I went to another auction, and pretty soon I went to flea markets, and pretty soon I went to radio meets in New York and Buffalo, and it just I thought it was a really interesting uh, time period in America,
It's
and I just got into it. They're beautiful. I wish I could show them to you right now, but
as soon as you mentioned the old radios, sorry, my brain immediately went to Oswald. Didn't he have a radio or something? He was working on a radio when I guess when they went through his things
he
after he was
worked in a
arrested.
radio factory
Yeah.
in Minsk. Yeah, but he didn't. I don't think he did any of the electronic stuff. He did like sheet metal work, and uh, you know, but that's where he was working, and um it's interesting. I found some documents that are really about that period in that are really interesting. These are newly released. This document.
They just released like 400 something pages or something on the NARA website, right?
Yeah, um, this is cool because the source for this is are Soviets or Russians. This is according to a senior staff officer of the Minsk KGB. Now, Oswald had an apartment in Minsk across from this Minsk CI school. It was a counterintelligence. It was a counterintelligence school that was going on, and that there were also Cubans involved in this, which is interesting. But anyway, according to this document, this guy says that ex-Marine Lee Harvey Oswald uh, was an agent of the KGB even before he met Marina. And the Minsk Ukrainian KGB had recruited Marina as a swallow.
Yeah.
A swallow was a female prostitute used for sexual entrapment
I asked you that about that in our last conversation.
operation. Yeah, well, this is the first time, though, it's come out from the Soviet side. Before, we speculated that she was a fake defector or that she was a sleeper agent coming back. But this verifies that she was, in fact, a prostitute. And that's how she was probably involved with Webster as well as Oswald.
And that's because before she had relationships with kind of profiles that fit Oswald about American citizens or someone that was going to
Yes,
another
in
country.
Leningrad. In fact, she was thrown out of Leningrad for prostitution uh, because she was involved with foreigners. Whether she was doing it for the KGB or whether she was just a prostitute, I don't know. But she got expelled from Leningrad, and that's how she ended up in Minsk with her uncle. And her uncle got her off. She would have had to go on to a labor camp and worked in the forest or in Siberia or somewhere. But according to this, they considered her an agent, but a reluctant one, and that she eventually, when she got to the United States, she completely cut off relations with the KGB. She just used it as an excuse to get to America, is what happened. But this document is funny because it also says that he provided them with information on his past. He knew he was dealing with the KGB, but what they considered an agent, it was like um, if a foreigner lived in a city, then the local KGB would try to recruit him, and even if they couldn't, they'd list him as a recruit or as a agent because it was a prestigious thing to have as many as you could have. So the effect of this is that yes, he talked to them, and he probably, as a fake defector, he was told to do that, and then they finally decided that he was not material for uh, you know usage as an agent, and they didn't deal with him anymore after he left the country.
Well, that's interesting because we have government documents that talk about Oswald might have given nation secrets to the Russians, and I wonder if they would have came across information that would have said that Oswald was a recruit of the KGB, and then they got paranoid, like Oswald's giving secrets.
Well, don't forget this too. Um, After the assassination, the Russians were scared because Oswald was a link to them. He was tied to them, and that they were going to get blamed for the assassination. That's why they sent Yuri Nosenko over here. And Nosenko said, I was Oswald's personal handler, and we didn't want anything to do with him. He was a wacko, and uh, we never used him. And it turned out that Nosenko was a fake agent too. He didn't really handle Oswald. They just sent him here to cover their rear end. And of course, the CIA fought over that. Angleton didn't believe him, and uh, the FBI did. But the FBI had uh, their own agent that was telling them he was right, and that guy ended up becoming later on recognized as a false agent. So actually, that cost Angleton. That was the end of Angleton. That kind of destroyed his career. Was all the he put Nosenko in like a prison for 2 years or something, and tortured him because he didn't believe him and he wouldn't break. So that cost Angleton his job basically. But what's happening here is the Soviets are trying to protect themselves too. Now I think Oswald was sent there to give information, but they knew what he was giving them, or it wasn't like he was really giving secrets to the Soviets. But it's also crazy to think that they wouldn't be interested in a guy that worked in the U2 program. And the same thing with Webster. Webster was with Rand Corporation and Rand Development, and they were very interested in plastics. And they set him up in a lab in Leningrad in polymer plastics to uh, to give them what information he had from the American company. So they were very similar. They were interested in those two areas, and these guys defect over there, which is crazy because hey, the Russians need this. Let's send them these guys. This is stuff they're interested in, and that they're going to.
Was Oswald and Webster both in the military and both plucked out for the defector program?
Um, they were both in the military. Oswald was plucked out during his time in the military, but Webster had left the Navy. He was in the Navy, and he got a job with Rand Development, which is a CIA affiliated organization. And they sent him to Moscow for a trade exhibition. And they were setting up a kitchen to show the Russians how modern America was. So we had this uh, he was in charge of bathtubs and stuff made out of fiberglass. And so he went there 3 times in 1959. And the first or second time he met a Russian woman who was working, who's CIA suspected she was working for the KGB. She was separated from her husband, and she was working in a gift shop where he was in Moscow, and they became involved and had an arranged relationship. Now, Webster was married at home. He had 2 children and a wife at home in Zelienople, Pennsylvania. But they were living in Cleveland at the time because Rand transferred him to Cleveland. And so he went over the third time and he decided to stay. Now, how much Rand was behind that, I don't know, but 2 people, George Rand and George Bookbinder, both former OSS officers, went with him. They were always with him when he went to the Soviet Union. But he decided to defect and gave up his citizenship. And he actually got Soviet citizenship. And they sent him to Leningrad to work. And Vera went with him, and she got pregnant. And then his father supposedly sent him a letter and said his mother had had a nervous breakdown and blah, blah, blah. And so he decided to return to the United States. And so then he abandoned Vera and her daughter, who was just a baby, and went back to the United States. And his wife had divorced him by then. And so he basically was abandoned by the intelligence, and he became alcoholic, and he transferred from one job to another. He remarried in 1967, and I got to know his son from his second marriage, and he gave me a lot of documents and pictures, and I know more about him than his father than he does, but he's been real help, and he still lives in Massachusetts. But finally, Webster had a stroke and died in 1970. No, 1990.
How about say 1970? Wasn't that long?
1999. He was 70, 71. So but the interesting thing about Webster is that Marina Oswald told one of her friends in Texas, Katya Ford, who was one of the Russian exiles, that she met her husband at the Moscow Trade Exhibition, that Oswald. But Oswald wasn't there. It was Webster. So right away, she's got them mixed up. And then in her address book, the CIA found the address of Webster's apartments in Leningrad. So she had visited those apartments regularly. And so she gave stories as to why she went there. She went there to see some guy named Lev Prezentsev. And so the CIA did a trace on Prezentsev, and there was no such person. But Webster did live in that apartment building. And then she said he was her girlfriend. This guy was in love with her girlfriend who was married, and she made up all kinds of. Then another time she said it was a guy that she met at a rest home. He was an older guy.
Purposely doing that, or is that just accidental memory slip?
I don't know what to make of Marina. I really don't. She changes her stories all the time. Even the Warren Commission said they couldn't trust anything she said. I don't know what her motivations were, but I found out a lot of stuff on these new documents. It appears to me, and I read the book written by Oswald's friend in Russia, who knew them well and was there when they met. And I came to the conclusion that the meeting wasn't accidental. Oswald was set up to meet her at that trade dance, trade union dance. There was a guy named Marazensa who was introduced them. Well, his mother was a Soviet scientist who was very high up. She was close to Khrushchev. She knew them all. She was a Communist Party uh, uh,
Supporter?
important
Okay.
important person,
Okay.
in the Communist Party, and she was giving a talk at that trade union dance. You didn't go to the dance just to dance. First, you had to get a speech, from someone from the Communist Party. Well, she was giving a talk that night, and Oswald went to the talk. Her son was running a projector in the orchestra pit. Now, the one story is that Oswald accidentally met Mirzensen and helped him run the projector. But what Oswald's buddy said was that they had known each other before that night, and he had invited him there to come and help run the projector. And then this guy and two or three of his friends were hanging around uh, Marina all night, dancing with her, and Oswald was introduced to her through them, and they were like protecting her, so no one else would dance with her except Oswald. So I think the whole thing was set up, and she was in on it, and they were in on it, and it was uh, a method to get her attached to him to send her back, that they would have a spy. So, but then what else is interesting? Supposedly Oswald went to this woman's house, the scientist, his mother, the night after, or the night of the dance. I don't know which, but he went to this party. Now, this woman is very high up in the Communist Party. She's a scientist that deals in secret projects, and they would let her have an American who could be a spy come to her house and hang out and talk to her. And she spent a lot of time talking to him. None of that makes too much sense. But all this stuff is really interesting because it's finally coming out from that side, from the Soviet side, what was going on.
What's more interesting to you, that the fact that the Russia kept documents on the Kennedy assassination, it's taken all this time for us to be able to get them, or the fact that it's actually, I mean, is it, to me, the whole Russian thing, like, I think Marina just used Oswald as a way to get to the US. And then once she got here, she was obviously stuck. She didn't know anybody, so she stayed with them, had kids and all that type of stuff. But the relationship, like dancing and all that, just doesn't sound like Oswald to me when you hear about the accounts of like they beat each other when they were back here in the States, unless something shifted in the mood or
Don't get it wrong. Oswald loved her. And I think she loved him in her own way. She was promiscuous and she flirted a lot, but I think they loved each other. And that was something that I don't think the Soviets thought would happen or counted on. I think that just was we'll get her to marry him and send her to the United States and she can dump him. But I don't think it was like that. I think, first of all, Marina just wanted to get to the United States. She didn't want to be a sleeper agent. And second of all, she did love Oswald, I think. They fought all the time, yeah. And she was, everybody blames it on Oswald, but as much as I dug into Marina, I think she'd be impossible to live with. I mean, she deserved what she got, as far as I'm concerned. She was constantly belittling him and, wanting things he couldn't afford, and he wasn't interested in money. And she was in with that Russian community. And that's another thing I'm going to get into more later on. I'm going to start researching. There's a lot to be involved with that Russian exile community in Dallas. They were right-wing oil people, and they were very anti-communist, and they were involved with intelligence agencies. And I think they play a big role in Oswald's babysitting when he was here. They took care of Marino so that he could run amok with and do things. And Ruth Bain was tied to it. DeMoran Schultz was part of it. And everywhere you go, there's the names of these people uh, pop up with other people in the assassination program. So that's going to be my next area of research. I'm going to get into that some more. But this is really interesting, this Russian stuff, because it's not something that we're being told by us, by the government. In other words, FBI or the CIA isn't telling us, oh, well, when he was over there, this is what happened. It's their version. And you can't accept it with 100% of truth, too, because they have motives to protect themselves. But it gives you an insight into what was going on while he was there. They were spying on him. They had his apartment bugged, and they had people following him.
Can you explain some of the spying tactics that were on him in Russia? Because, like, I know some of the stuff about surveilling his mail over here, and I'm sure there's other spy tactics that they were using, but it just doesn't make sense to me about how Robert Webster gets his U.S. or gets his Russian citizenship, but Oswald doesn't.
Well, if you wanted in a simple, they thought that Webster was real defector because he was in love with this girl and he offered them secrets and plastics. And they knew, I think they knew that Oswald was not a real defector. I think they suspected him of being, a double agent, so they didn't give him citizenship. And Webster only had his citizenship. He can't come back to the United States on the Russian quota. And then it took him a year or two more he had to reapply for American citizenship, and he finally got it in the 60s, later 60s. But I think they really thought that Webster, I think, thought he was being used and manipulated by RAND and by Air Force intelligence over there. He was part of a program called Longstride, which it's still vague what it was. And it involved personnel records of military people behind the Soviet lines and all this stuff. But what really got me was I discovered that Ruth Paine's sister, Sylvia Hyde Hoke, worked in personnel for the Air Force intelligence. So think about it. Is that a coincidence? I mean, Air Force intelligence is handling Webster through a program called Longstride, and she's involved in it. It can't be a coincidence, And then you got to consider that Marina was writing letters, or not Marina, Ruth Paine was writing letters to pen pals in the Soviet Union in the 50s as part of a program to improve relationships between us and the Russians. So she had a pen pal over there. She had a pen pal named Ella. Oswald's was in love with a woman named Ella German, who worked at the radio factory that in fact, he proposed to her and she turned him down. And Marina was on the rebound. That's why he took Marina out and asked her to marry him and everything, because he wanted to hurt Ella originally. Then he fell in love with Marina later on. But so you see this tie between Ruth Paine, her sister, and possibly defectors in the Soviet Union. Were the defectors able to communicate back through pen pal people that were relationships of pen pals to people like Ruth Paine, who appear to the Soviets as just an ordinary citizen who's writing to a Russian citizen?
Now, is it just defectors, or do we got KGB agents that are working for U.S. government?
That could be too. I mean, it's a wilderness of mirrors, because CIA and FBI are trying to fake each other out all the time, and you can't. I mean, nothing is written in stone. I mean, anything could be a lie. They lie to each other. They lie to themselves. And now some interesting things. I don't know if you're aware of this. John Newman has a new book out. He has supposedly found Popov's mole in the Soviet Union, in the CIA. And he says that it was, what's his name? I'm going blank here. It'll come to me in a minute. And he said that this mole was in the security division, and he was Angleton's close friend. And Angleton believed everything he said. And it was him that was responsible for the mole hunt, not Angleton. In other words, through Angleton did the mole hunt because this guy, who was the mole, sent a fake mole defector, a fake mole hunter to the Soviet Union because he knew he was the mole. And he sent Oswald to Russia to hunt for this mole. And they kept the Russian division of the CIA out of it. They didn't send them any information because Angleton thought that's where the mole was in the Russian division. And so that was why the false mole hunt, where he sent little tidbits like Oswald's height or weight or when his mother was born, that would come back to the Soviet Russia division. And if one of them started writing that stuff or telling that stuff, they knew that was the mole because it was a fake, it was false card information. So, I mean, that just complicates everything more. So here you've got, I got to think of his name. It's coming.
Do you trust Oswald's friend in Russia, the one that wrote a book about him and
I
everything?
do. I
Okay.
do. I like him. He comes across as a genuine, I mean, he's a Soviet patriot, and he says, it was our duty to watch. He was watching him too. It was our duty, patriotic duty, to do this. They didn't see anything wrong with it. But by the same token, he liked Oswald, and they talked, and probably more than I think Oswald talked to anybody. He talked to Tidovets, is his name, Ernest Tidovets. He talked to him about personal things, which he didn't do even with Marina. He didn't hardly do that. She didn't know he had a brother and a mother alive until after they were back in the United States. I mean, he was an excellent secret keeper. He didn't tell anybody anything, and that's why they used him. They knew he was good at that. And another thing that just came out in these documents, which is astounding, you're aware of the core Congress on Racial Equality when, Hoover had this thing called COINTELPRO.
Yeah, I know about that.
Counterintelligence. Well, they were investigating groups like
Black Panther Party, KKK.
the Black Panther Party, the Corps, FBCC, and all that stuff. In fact, when Oswald went to Clinton with Ferry and Shaw, and you're aware of that, when he went and got in line with the blacks for voter registration in Clinton,
I've heard about it, but I've never got into detail on it.
Well, that was the big thing with the Garrison investigation. He had all these people in Clinton that saw them together and saw Oswald in that line. And I mean, this is proof that Oswald was involved with Shaw and Ferry. And
Well, it would make sense about when he got arrested. What the guy said in an interview was that when he arrested Oswald or tried to arrest Oswald in the theater, Oswald stood up and said, "This is exactly what you're doing to the blacks." That's exactly word for word what was said in that interview. That would line up with that.
yeah. Well, it's a wilderness of mirrors. But here's what's new. Jefferson Morley has discovered that Angleton, not Hoover, was one of the main movers in COINTELPRO. The CIA and the FBI did it together.
Yeah, that's new.
And wow, that opens doors to understanding COINTELPRO, that Angleton was in. He's got his fingers in everything, and you don't know it. It's behind the scenes. It's under the blanket. And you dig down into any part of this, and at the bottom, you'll find Angleton. You'll find his name. You'll find his.
I don't think that's right though. I just don't, it's never just one so simple as it all tracks back to this. I feel like there's a little bit more than that, or maybe they're setting up Angleton
Oh,
for
I'm not
something.
saying that Angleton's solely responsible for the assassination, but I'm saying is that he is a prime mover in many areas of this, and particularly Oswald. Angleton was handling Oswald even before he went to Russia. He had files on Oswald when nobody did, and he didn't share them with anyone else in the CIA. They had two sets of files. One they shared and one they didn't. And that was all Angleton. And Angleton's the one that sent him there to the Soviet Union. So to understand the whole thing, you have to know that Angleton was a mover behind the scenes, especially of Oswald.
Do you think he's in charge of the whole Mexico City thing?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. I'm convinced that Mexico City was all an Angleton maneuver to fake out everybody, especially, see, after, here's the thing. Oswald is not only the perfect patsy, he's the perfect uh, way to get everybody to shut up and keep their mouth shut. Because the CIA, when his name came up, they panicked because they knew he was involved in these programs and that how bad it would look for them. And it was Angleton that set that all up with Mexico City. So when the crap hit the fan, they FBI, CIA, and everybody had to go protect themselves. And so that made sure that the cover-up was going to work, that the Warren Commission would be formed to cover it up. Not because um, they thought Oswald did it or that the Soviets didn't do it, just to protect themselves.
There's a new, I guess, rumor, not rumor, but it's kind of what we've all been saying for a while, which was that it had to be Oswald because we didn't want to go to war with Russia and all this type of stuff. I had saw someone recently bring that back up again in the discussion of that getting brought up again. Also with some new document releases, the one that just happened, they were questioning things like Northwoods, and they were questioning things like the defector program, saying that those weren't real, which we have documents on, which is nuts. But it's kind of countering, they're trying to counter the new document releases, so there's like nothing new. But do you think a lot of this could be to protect, like it had to be Oswald to protect all the issues that are going on in Mexico City, which was this place where spies meet? There's a lot of intelligence activity in Mexico City. There's even propaganda films back in like the 40s that nobody really remembers, 40s and 50s. And we know now through COINTELPRO and other programs, not just happening domestically of groups being infiltrated, but also the involvement of the FBI in Latin America and many other countries out there. So I just start questioning, like, is a lot of this to protect some of their sensitive intelligence operations that might not have anything to do with Oswald? But it's like when I brought up with Blakey about Amwave, about some of those documents being Amwave related. You could have Oswald's name at the bottom, but then just you don't have to release it because it could be classified because it has Amwave stuff all over it. And we saw in the most recent release, the one that was over like something thousand documents in December, that a lot of those were Amwave stuff. So I'm like, they're protecting all their intelligence operations that have nothing to do with the Kennedy stuff, but they're just so infiltrated where Oswald might have accidentally made a connection, might have started something or set up something, not him personally, but met with someone who might be doing activity down there that was another intelligence asset.
You hit the nail on the head. I mean, that's exactly what happened. That whole business of that guy impersonating Oswald was part of some program that the CIA thought was very sensitive. And when Oswald went down there, and Angleton knew that, he knew that. And so Oswald's Mexico City journey thing was set up to do that, to scare them, because this was a top secret thing and they didn't want the Warren Commission or anybody else digging into this. And if you you had Blakey on, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Blakey said the one area that he couldn't get the CIA to cooperate in any way was Mexico City. It was the most sensitive aspect of his investigation, and they would not cooperate. They were covering something up in Mexico City, and it may have been their dealings with the Mexican police, or and I think Traficante and them were involved in Mexico City somehow with uh, with the Mexican police. So there was something going on there that they were afraid was going to come out if they investigated Oswald's visit
Do
there.
you think the House Select Committee on Assassinations was compromised?
Yes,
Okay. 'Cause
absolutely.
I've seen a
And
couple
now
people
even
go
I think
down into
Blakey
Mexico
does.
City. Yeah,
Don't you think Blakey?
Blakey thinks that the CIA withheld documents from him now. He believes that they didn't give him a full right to do an investigation. But I think a lot of these guys are much like some of these agents that you look at, like, were they 100% knowing of what was going on? No, but they were doing something without knowing. As much as I think Ruth Payne was in the same boat, that she was not 100% in on every single thing that was going on. I think it was, if you need to know, you know, but if you don't, kind of mindless helping in a sense. I forgot what
Yeah,
the official term
that
for
may
it.
be, but I don't trust Ruth Payne 2 feet.
I mean, I don't trust a lot of like Ruth Payne stuff. I don't
She's
trust
a
a
liar, for one thing. She's manipulative and she's sneaky. And I mean,
I think there's a lot of cover your ass stuff that's going on here, and I think it's because you find out after the fact. But that there's a real thing where you start asking serious questions, and it's like the HSCA investigation. As much as they were able to prove a probable conspiracy, I also think that a lot of these people work for the government. It's a committee that was created by the government. I was like, if they can just come over and tell you we have a sensitive operation, I mean, look at the whole church committee report. I mean, even that's a bit of a whitewash when you get down to the basis that nobody paid the price for any of the actions that were done on it. So the HSCA's investigation, there's a couple people, I think, I don't remember who the names were, that went down to Mexico City, but we have those documents, but it doesn't seem like a lot of information for as much as we probably know what was going on in Mexico City.
you have to realize too this. I mean, look at it this way. Okay, you're on the government probe like the House assassinations. Are you going to come out and say that the Warren Commission was totally wrong, that the government had been lying to the people all this time, even if you found that out? I mean, you see what I'm going?
But we have the documents now to show that they knew about Oswald. We have those documents now that say that the 201 file, the agencies in the beginning of the first release of some of these documents stated that they had no connection with Oswald. And we know now, after all these years, that they had a connection with Oswald. They had files on him. They were keeping tabs on him, and they knew about him. So when it comes to that, and even destruction of the prior assassination plots on Kennedy that were destroyed by the Secret Service after John Thunheim requested for those. So they're making themselves look really bad by doing all of this. Now, if it's to cover up an intelligence operation, whether Oswald had involvement in that intelligence operation, I would just want to know, how deep does it go? Does it get to the point where you have someone that I wouldn't say, I mean, looks like Oswald going around using his name? Well, how many people? Because I'm seeing various statements now of somebody using Oswald's name, a person from a U.S. Select Service System thing that's in the Warren Commission report. I talked about a Harvey Oswald sat in front of them, and it did not match the person that was on the TV that was alleged for killing the president.
You're right. There's a lot of false information too, but then there's another book out that's really interesting. It's about the Scorzani papers. Okay, you know Otto Scorzani was. You don't. Okay. Otto Scorzani was an SS commando for Hitler. He was the most famous commando in the world. He flew a raid into Italy and rescued Mussolini from a mountain fortress with gliders. Uh, After the war, he became an intelligent uh, contact for kind of like paperclip, but he did it on his own pretty much, and he was going to start a Fourth Reich in Spain or whatever. But he was constantly being used by not only American intelligence but British and other people because he was this expert in all kinds of things, including assassination. And Scorzani was part of the biggest gun running uh, organization in the world, and they were running guns to and they were training people, and the French assassins were working for him at the in camps in Spain, training commandos. So anyway, these Scorzani's papers were bought by this researcher after he died, and he wrote a book on it. And there's a lot of interesting stuff in it. But the main one for me is, do you know who Thomas Eli Davis is?
I've heard the name before.
Yeah. Well, all right. When Jack Ruby went to trial, his lawyer asked him, is there anything that we need to know that could hurt us in trial? You know, is there anything? And he said, Thomas Eli Davis. Well, Thomas Eli Davis and Ruby ran guns to Cuba. He was a gun runner and a mercenary, and he worked at the training camps in Pontchartrain and all this stuff. And he used Oswald's name a lot. He was arrested on the day of the assassination in Algiers, and they found a letter on him referring to Oswald and JFK. And it was QJ Wynn that got him out of jail. QJ Wynn was the CIA head of assassination projects. He was a foreign diplomat who recruited Corsican assassin. And he's, you know, we didn't know his name till recently. He's a top secret guy. So this Thomas Eli Davis is a whole another area to research right now. And he was a gun runner, and he was associated with Ruby, and he's using Oswald's name. So apparently he knew Oswald as well. And he's running guns with Scorzani. So this thing is so deep and so complicated that.
Do you believe that it's this deep, though? Do you think that it's just a lot of this could be just maybe some going down the wrong roads on some things? I feel
Of course.
Okay.
I think a lot of it's disinformation. A lot of the books that come out are sponsored by, you know, American intelligence to send researchers on the wrong path. You know, the guy in the
recent interview with the guy who said knew Oswald, that was completely opposite than the one in Russia. I don't remember what his name is. Do you remember what his name is? It was just recently just happened. He came out talking in an interview about
guy in
Oswald.
Russia,
No,
Peter Gregory.
Not Peter Gregory's the American one, right?
No, he's Russian.
He's Russian?
Yeah.
Someone just made a statement recently about knowing Oswald, and everyone was saying that he's lying or something like that.
Well, the only one I can think of is Gregory. His father was the first Russian immigrant that dealt with Marina and Lee and introduced them to the Russian community. He what's amazing about this guy teaches. He teaches in a college, and he teaches English, I think, and he wants Marina to teach him English. And same thing with Ruth Payne. She's a Russian teacher.
But you mean he wants?
I mean, I'm sorry. He wanted to teach him Russian. He teaches in a Russian university.
I was like, "Fuck, find somebody better."
He wants her to. Well, maybe no. He wanted her to teach his son, and his son already knew Russian. And Ruth Payne was a Russian teacher at a school, and she wants Marina to teach her Russian. So, you know, I mean, this is like a ruse. Yeah, we're going to get a local girl to teach. Well, anyway, they were in Texas, and he was the one that had a lot to do with this. Well, his son wrote this book because he did know the Oswalds. He drove them around. And here's what gets you about the book. He attributes everything to his father. He says his father's the one that was Marina's translator. He said that her father was the one that got him the job at Jaggers, Childs, and Stovall. The truth is, it was de Morenschildt that got him the job at Jaggers, Childs, Stovall, and it was a guy named Mamontov who was the. So those are wrong. Those are lies. And here he's written this book, and in the book, he never mentions George de Morenschildt once. And he only mentions Ruth Payne in passing as a lady that was kind to Marina. The whole book's about him and his father, and how they were, you know, and how Oswald was likely the assassin. He beat Marina and he would do this. And so it's a really one-sided book. I thought of the guy's name, pop off some more.
Mm-hmm.
Bruce Soley.
I've never heard that
He
name
was
before.
head of the security division of the CIA, and he was Angleton's close friend. So you got to think that Angleton, no wonder he was paranoiac. He was his best friend was Kim Philby. Kim Philby ended up being a Russian spy. His best friend Soley ends up being a Russian spy, and then Popov. I mean, for counterintelligence agents, who was always looking for moles. He his best friends were the people he was looking for. I mean, and he didn't know it.
So he either wasn't that good or was looking in all the wrong spots.
Oh, some people think he was a mole, Angleton himself, and that this whole mole hunt was a ruse to take attention away from himself.
Who has the power to be able to write visas for people?
Yeah. What's that again? I'm sorry.
Who has the power to be able to rush a visa or write a visa or get a file through?
That's politics. I don't know. That's a good question. All
Because
you need is somebody
somehow you have
important to say,
Oswald traveling all these places, and you
yeah,
somehow, I don't know how where that disappears to. Why can't you get certain flight logs of things as well? Either when people try and request them through the Freedom of Information Act, I mean that would really help narrow down sometimes as well too. But there's a lot of information which doesn't seem like it would be important to anything that we're still not getting out of some of these files. I mean, trying to clear up who Oswald is, you can pick anything. He could be Russian, he could be Cuban, he could be anything because they've gave you so much stuff where it's like, what can you sort through? And this is where I start pointing towards the investigations into some of this stuff. If you're running off that information, I need to know if I can trust that investigation. And right now, it seems like I really can't trust any of these investigations by the HSCA, by the Warren Commission, by anything of this, because everyone's trying to pitch a different story and tell you, actually, that information was wrong. Here's the real information. I'm like, and even the ARRB, I mean, their whole job was to get those files, and they're done, and we still don't have files.
yeah, yeah, yeah. The thing about it is, it's like I said, it would kill the country. It would hurt the country so much that they're not going to say, "Oh, you know, everything that they told you was a lie." The House Assassinations Committee, originally, they had a guy named Richard Sprague who was going to be head of it, and he was going to pull up trucks to the CIA and FBI and take all the documents. He said that to the press. He was going to get everything from them, and there was going to be no immunity. And he was going to, and within a week, he's out of they got rid of him, and they put Blakey in. And Blakey was a CIA guy. He believed them. He trusted them. And that was the whole downfall of that, because they would lie to him, or they wouldn't give him documents, or they wouldn't cooperate with him, or they'd give him fake documents.
Or they had an agent that infiltrated the HSCA and broke into their safe and went through autopsy photos without a glove and started reading a diary. And I asked him about that. He said, yeah, they handled it. They fired him. I go, but you never figured out how he got the safe codes? Those are supposed to be your codes, your team's codes. So that means someone on the inside was feeding some information to you. If he's just a janitor, turns out to be a CIA guy.
Yeah. And they broke into Otto Atepka's safe to get files on Oswald. He worked for the State Department, and he thought that Oswald looked funny as a defector, that he was raising questions, and they broke in and stole his files. They only stole the ones on Oswald, and that was it.
So when Webster returns, he was the one that got all the press, right? And Oswald didn't.
Yes, yes. I have all of his press releases. There was a lot written about him. When he came back to Pittsburgh and landed, there were like 200 people there, press, media. When Oswald came in on the boat to Hoboken, there was nobody. Here's a guy that defected to the Soviet Union, offered to give secrets, and the media is not even there when he comes back home. And the only one that was there was Spaz T. Reckon, who was head of the Travelers Aid Society, but was also working for the CIA. He's there to meet Oswald and debrief him or whatever, or take him to New York to get a hotel room. But nobody's interested in it. Now that's, to me, that says volumes. That they didn't debrief him, that they weren't interested in him, that the Congress didn't investigate him. He goes to Russia. He openly says, I'm going to give secrets to the Russians, and nobody cares. When he comes back, they ignore him. Webster goes over, and
Do you think that's a thing with the press? Do you think that somehow the media and the government or something, they might have sent a message to him like, don't popularize this story?
it's part of Mockingbird.
Okay.
They tell the press, they give them stories and they tell them you can print this and don't, they give them a version of it and that's it. So they were apparently told not to. I mean, they kept it a secret or something. I mean, no one knew he was either no one knew he was landing there, or I mean, even if that was the case, when he gets back to Texas, you think there'd be reporters beating down his door, wanting to talk to him. What was it like in Russia? Did you give any secrets? But nobody's interested in this guy, and that completely tells you that he's working for us. Because if it was real, I mean, in Webster, he had to go before Congress, and then they had several debriefings and interrogations and threatened him and everything, and he went through hell when he came back. And he didn't give secrets to the Russians, and he didn't openly say I'm a Marxist or I'm a communist like Oswald did. And he was treated as a real defector when he came back, where Oswald wasn't.
Whose activity was the most suspicious in Russia between Webster and Oswald?
Oh, I think Oswald. Webster's wasn't really that suspicious. He was so involved with that woman, and he was working in plastics. You could see his view, his home life. His wife was diabetic, and they were in debt. She had constant medical bills, and it was getting to be a strain on him. And he meets a girl in Russia, and in Russia he's an expert on plastics, which in the United States he's just another plastics worker. And he gets a chance to maybe be a leading figure if he goes to Leningrad and works in this laboratory and develops things. They did like glass bubbles for airplanes, and he had this Rand spray gun was something they wanted real bad, and he was going to give it to them, but then they didn't have the parts, they didn't have the money to pay for it, and he ended up couldn't make it in Russia because they didn't have the materials, shortages of everything. And so after a while he realized that he made a mistake, and his mother was sick, and he went back to the United States. But if you look at my book, in the back, I have all the places that this guy worked in his life, and it fills volumes. He'd work 2 weeks here, 3 weeks there, a month here, one job to another. Just incredible how he did to support himself and barely, support the family. All kinds of different jobs that he had. And his son talked about his alcoholism and, what a problem it was. But what really interested me too was, here's a guy who was tied to Oswald and Marina, and he said he indicated that he did know Marina. And he never talked about this. And this is a guy who his son portrayed as a narcissistic drunk who would go to bars and talk about, build himself up and, egomaniac type thing. And yet I talked to 2 or 3 people that worked with him. I talked to his sons. I tried to talk to his mother, but she was like Alzheimer's. She couldn't remember. She didn't even remember where she met him. And she died recently. And I asked his son, didn't he ever talk about this, about Russia or about Oswald? No, never. One time he sat them down and he told them that uh, he had lived in Russia and that he had a girl. I don't know if he told them it was his wife or what, and they had a child there, and that was it. So here's a guy that's a narcissistic. You think he'd be bragging to everybody that he could write a book. Hey, I knew Oswald. I knew Marina. I dated Marina. Nothing. So that tells me that he was part of maybe MK Ultra or something where they got inside his head and he could not talk about stuff like Oswald didn't talk about stuff. So,
or he just feared for his life or his family if he started talking about stuff.
yeah. And by the way, I found his daughter in Russia, Svetlana. She was a baby when he left Russia.
You're better than Ancestry.com on tracking these people
I
down.
tracked her down. She lives in Moscow. I have her picture on my website. And I called her. She would not talk to me. And I had Scott, her half-brother, call her. She would not talk to him. And I said, aren't you interested in your father? And I sent her a picture of the book. I said, I'll send you a copy of the book and you can read about your father. And I had a feeling that she's afraid, that I guess if you live in Russia, you're afraid that people are listening on the phone, people are bugging your mail, and that she'd get in trouble somehow. But I couldn't get to her. And I talked to Bill Simpich about it. And he thought maybe they could get like Judge, what's his name? Judge Turnheim.
Judge Thunheim.
Judge Turnheim to write her a letter
Thunheim.
and saying, this is legitimate. This isn't, a trick, whatever, to talk to us. But I'd like to talk to her. And she teaches English. She's a kind of a freelance teacher of English language, which is a bit interesting. And so I could talk to her in English. But I don't know what happened. I'd like to know more about her mother and, what happened after her father left. She never married. And she's kind of frumpy looking. Blonde hair. Webster had blonde hair. But that was amazing. I never thought I'd find her. She's like 60 something. She was born in 1960.
It's difficult for me because there's a number of people that have died taking secrets to the grave.
Yeah.
And it's like what we could have known. Like I give a lot of crap sometimes, and it's not wrongfully so, but I mean, I would consider right in my regard to a lot of sites that put up paywalls for stuff, especially documents and stuff, really kind of upsets me. And I know people put hard work, and I understand you should be compensated for that 100%. But besides me reaching out to you guys to be able to try and sort this giant puzzle piece together a little bit, just for my own basic sanity on trying to understand the assassination, which is, I mean, it's a counterintuitive thing right there. If you really talk about trying to find sanity in the assassination aspect of things, but everything has been like documents where I have to go and try and find something, and everything comes up paywall, 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 paywall. And it's just like, well, how do you get the information out there? So then you're looking at the National Archives, the documents that we do have, they just paint such a different picture, but then it leads to interviews, or it leads to talking to people who've done independent research. And I've seen through your book, you have plenty of documentation to back up some of the stuff that you write about as well, too. But there's so much evidence, or there's just so much to it. The only thing I can find common ground with is I can just point to, here's the investigation and here's what they did, and that's not right in anything, whether it's us, being able to talk about like I guess the changing of documentation that came out later to prove the official story wrong, the HSCA's investigation, and how it had so many flaws to it as well too. but was still able to prove the Warren Commission flaws. You're showing later investigations that prove the original one wrong. On that basis, you kind of go with, I mean, wasn't an investigation. And that's what I try and get the public in on. But trying to sort through all this documentation, there's always someone that has some new information that came out or something like that. I mean, there's people out there that are saying that Jack Ruby didn't kill Oswald. And I'm
Yeah,
just
I
like,
know. See,
yeah,
that's disinformation. That's put out by people that want to uh, turn it into a circus. You know, ridiculous stories like that wasn't Ruby, that the guy in the car shot the Secret Service agent shot him. There's even one that Jackie shot.
yeah, I don't
You believe
entertain those.
you believe that? I mean, it's crazy. It's insane. But a lot of that is on purpose disinformation. They're putting it out there to make researchers look silly, and people will jump on it.
Well, that is very real because when you look at the slandering of names, and that happens today as well to certain people that aren't against or against the official narrative. Even Robert Kennedy announcing his election and everything, which in my opinion, I don't think it's a possibility. I'm too into the deep state to think that they would ever allow that guy. And I think he would be great. He's going to have my vote. But it's just that aspect of like, yo, he's already talking about going into the COVID stuff and then going into the JFK stuff. I'm like, bro, you're hitting every single thing you're not supposed to talk about ever.
That's right. That's
Um,
right.
but even the article the Daily Beast wrote about him and a bunch of other articles that came out about him just labeled him anti-vaxxer, runs for president, where I'm just like, it's the slander part. I mean, they did the same thing to Wilson or Hughes, the guy who saw Jack Ruby in Traficante's prison. They called that guy an unreliable reporter and everything. I was like, then why'd you have him on your staff for so long?
Yeah. Yeah. That guy's in that book too, in the Scorsese book.
Is it Hudson? Hudson's his name.
Yeah, Hudson Wilson or Wilson Hudson or something like that. And that's an interesting guy too. But he saw Jack Ruby there in talking to Traficante in the
Yeah.
Cuban prison.
And I do believe that.
Yeah, I do too. And there was another guy there besides him that said the same thing. Another prisoner who was with Traficante in the prison, and Martino was there. John Martino is.
Heard the name.
He was kind of a mafioso guy that was involved with. He's one of the people that said Kennedy was going to die on the 22nd. He had kept his son home from school to watch it on TV. He knew it was coming because he was affiliated with mafia and Traficante in particular. And he was put in prison by Castro. He was involved with the casinos in drugs in Cuba before Castro took over. And he imprisoned a lot of those guys. And Martino was one. Martino, on his deathbed, told that they killed him, that the mob was involved in the killing. So, I mean, we had a lot of deathbed confessions, but the media doesn't print it. I mean, here's how, there's Howard Hunt, he's on his deathbed. He tells his son, that they killed Kennedy, that Lyndon Johnson wasn't behind it, and McCord, and I'm not McCord, Mary Meyer, Cord Meyer was involved in. And
wait, Mary Pinocchio, whatever middle name is, Meyer.
Mary Pinchot.
Yeah, that's her middle name.
Pinchot Meyer. She was married to Cord Meyer. She was having an affair with JFK, and she was murdered. And I think Angleton was behind that too.
Is that Dr. Mary Sherman?
No.
Who's the lady that died by like half her body was burned up?
And that was Mary Sherman.
Yeah, her official autopsy.
That was in New Orleans.
Her official autopsy said knife wound to the heart.
Yeah, Mary Meyer was a girl, mistress of Kennedy. She was separated from Cord Meyer, who was very high up in the CIA, and she lived in Georgetown. And her sister was married to the guy from the Washington Post, the head guy, the Washington Post, and they all lived in this Georgetown. The Kennedys lived there sometimes, and the Myers and all these people. And after she died, she was on a bike trail. She was walking. Every day she walked on this bike, not bike trail, it was along a river. It was
You said after she died.
after she died, she was killed. Somebody shot her.
Okay.
And on that trail, a man shot her, and they arrested a black guy, and he had a black lawyer, a woman that was really good, and she got him off. And there's a good book about it, about that. A guy named Jansen wrote it, and his father was in the CIA, and he knew Mary Meyer when he was a child. She was a neighbor, and he knew her, and he thinks that Angleton had her killed. Anyway, she had a diary, and in it, I guess JFK was telling her stuff in bed, and they even took marijuana together. No, LSD. They took
Jesus.
She was a friend of, and she dealt with.
You said marijuana. I was like, that's not bad. Why are you whispering?
Well, they did that. No,
LSD.
I mean LSD. She was friends with that LSD guru, and he got her some. And
Timothy Leary?
Yeah, she was friends with him.
Shit.
She was friends with Timothy Leary, and he got her some LSD, and her and Kennedy did it in bed. They took some. He just wanted to see what it was like. You know, he was experimental. He liked to experiment. And so Angleton broke into her. She was an artist, and he broke into her studio and took her diary. Just like he went to Win Scott's wife and took all his papers.
Isn't there a theory that he also took Dorothy Kilgallen's diary?
That could be. And nobody knows who took hers, but it disappeared. I think more likely it was FBI that took hers. But anyway.
Is he protecting nation secrets by like just protecting the credibility of the president by doing that? Or is he taking the fact that he's covering up the information that he's afraid that they might leak out?
He's covering up. She had come to the conclusion that the CIA killed Kennedy right after the Warren report. She was killed right after the Warren report came out, like the next week. And she had told people that she knew what was going on. And Cord Meyer, then when she was killed, Cord Meyer told somebody the same people killed her that killed JFK. Cord Meyer told it to a friend of his. So he knew it. But that's a good book you should read. I can't remember the title, but it's about the guy's name is Jansen, I think, and it's about Mary's
monkey.
No, not Mary's monkey.
You know that book, right?
Mary's Mosaic.
Okay, I've heard that name before. Is that Peter Janney's book?
Yeah, Janney, not Jansen. I said Jansen.
I invited him on.
I'm having trouble. I had some oral surgery. I don't know if you noticed my talking isn't. It's funny.
I think you're doing good.
It's swollen. It's hard to talk.
Well, you look fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
When it comes to areas you would stay out of when it comes to the assassination, what do you think are giant kind of like just endless pits to not even go near?
Marilyn Monroe, for one.
Which is crazy because that's like the biggest thing that everyone my generation knows about Kennedy.
It's too sensational.
I am look. I know I was interested in that in the beginning, but I had someone like when I brought the JFK thing, someone goes, "Oh, did you know like the Marilyn Monroe stuff?" And I just like looked at him, I go, "Look, just keep that to yourself, but don't even say it."
Yeah, it's all. The problem is, it's just going to be blown up because Marilyn Monroe was Marilyn Monroe. She was bigger than life, and no matter what, writers are going to put in to make it a story. Even there's a good the researcher that Shaw, the guy that wrote the book about Kilgallen.
Don't bring up his name around me.
Mm-hmm. You don't like him?
No.
Why?
Not gonna say it on air.
Okay. Anyway, he wrote a book about Marilyn and Dorothy, and he thinks Bobby Kennedy, had her killed or something. This is all outrageous. Nobody knows what happened for real, And when you start getting into that stuff, uh, it's like UFOs. It's crazy.
There's a real double standard when it comes to protecting people's credibility that these agencies are kind of, I guess, doing in a lot of aspects of covering up things. They're protecting either a scandal or they're protecting something like that. But then you have the opposite end where the agencies are also targeting people and literally character assassinating them by saying this person's a nut job, this person's unstable. Which makes it really extremely difficult to try and get information out. But I mean, I'm sure there's probably a bunch of scandal stuff that they're covering up, which makes it look really bad on them for covering stuff up. But it's also, I mean, a scandal breaks about a president. That's your agencies. You pissed off your agencies. They're supposed to cover that up for you. So when you hear about documents, when you hear about this type of stuff, it's modern day problems we're still experiencing today, which is why it's so important. But you can look at the past. I mean, look at the number of Johnson scandals that were happening at the time, and then he gets elected president and they all dropped. I don't think Johnson did it, but I think you can start looking at how powerful your agencies are connected into the media, and it tests the relationship of the media. I'm like, there's just simple stuff that the assassination, without going into speculation, can just prove that they're connected, the agencies are, into a lot of institutional things that we hold, I guess, as high authorities of information.
Well, here's the thing. Everybody's human. And if you want to dig up something on someone, you can find it. There's something there. Very few people are saints, and they've lived through, they make mistakes and they add, things. However, if you're if you're a Kennedy or a Marilyn Monroe or somebody like that, that's different. Nobody writes books about Johnson's affairs. Lyndon Johnson has many affairs or more than Oswald did. He was screwing all his secretaries.
I got to write a book about it. I would write a book about it.
It's unbelievable how many.
They
And
called
the
them
only
bull
one,
balls.
the only one that wrote about it was his mistress of 20 some years, 30 years. She wrote about their life together, and she had a child to him, and all this stuff, and nobody would know it except for that.
I
And
got to
nobody,
interview that baby.
Warren G. Harding, a boring president, had all these affairs, but nobody writes about it. They don't care. But if your name's Kennedy, whoa. And the simplest way when somebody's getting close to the truth, or when they're dangerous to especially agencies like the CIA, when they start getting close to the truth, the best way to get people to ignore them is to defame them, to take away their credibility, and that's what they tried to do to Jim Garrison, and that's what they tried to do to Cyril Wecht. And they put all these fake charges. I mean, Garrison had to go to court for supposedly taking bribes from the mafia and stuff. And of course, he was found innocent. It wasn't true. But by then, Jack Garrison, he's in with the mob. Cyril Wecht was taken to court over stuff, ridiculous charges, and he was innocent because he was telling the truth. He had seen the autopsy photographs. He had seen Kennedy's brain, or whatever. And so that he was dangerous. So they go in and they try to, he's taking money. He was involved with women. He was this, he was that, and that's what they do. And it's who's really good at it now is Trump. Trump, because as soon as somebody finds something they did, he attacks. His defense is always attack, and he attacks with the same things that he's doing. They found documents in my house, and then he attacks them. Biden had documents in his house. I mean, it's the best defense there is attack and try to defame and find things. Yeah, Kennedy had affairs, but what does that have to do with him being a president? If he did the job, if it hadn't been for him, we'd all be dead. The missile crisis cost him his life, in my mind. That was one of the points where they decided to kill him.
Did you not think it was weird that Allen Dulles went with Kennedy over Nixon?
In what?
The debates, the election.
He did?
Yeah, Allen Dulles did. He went with Kennedy over that, and then when Kennedy was elected, he hired Hoover and he hired Allen Dulles, which isn't that crazy. Those guys have been director for a very long time. If you get the directors to follow you, then the whole agencies will as well too. But Allen Dulles chose Kennedy over Nixon, and I'm
I think
just
he thought he could control Kennedy
that's what I
because he
thought.
was
Yeah,
young.
that's what, he's a pushover.
Nixon all
We
about him.
would we wouldn't have the history of Nixon that we do now if he would have beat Kennedy.
He was paranoid, and he didn't trust agencies like the CIA either. In fact, he bucked them quite a bit. So that's another reason for Watergate. But yeah, you're right. But I think Dulles thought he could control Kennedy because Kennedy was young, and inexperienced, and he thought he could pull the Bay of Pigs off and get Kennedy to go along with it. They had planned the Bay of Pigs. It was Nixon and that was really behind that, and they planned this Bay of Pigs thing. Kennedy didn't like it, but he's a new young guy. And Dulles says, "Well, you know, we've studied this; it can't fail." And Eisenhower approved it. Yeah. And Kennedy finally said, "Well, I guess so, but we're not going to involve American troops. We're not going to make it look like we're doing this. It's got to be completely. And I'm not going to do this, and I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to send in American troops." And so he okayed it. And Dulles knew it was going to fail. He knew that what what would happen is the guys would be stranded on the beach, and Kennedy would be forced to send in American support. That was he was convinced of that, and he didn't want to be there when the argument started, so he left town. But Kennedy didn't. They thought for sure that they knew the plan couldn't succeed, and they knew that they thought that they'd get him to acquiesce and send in support to save the troops, and he didn't. And that was the beginning of the end for him. uh, that, and then the missile crisis where they wanted to invade Cuba, and he didn't do it. And then he goes backdoor to Khrushchev to solve it, and get us keep it. We'd all be dead now. I think if Johnson was president, if Reagan was president, if Ford was president, they'd have gone along with the military, and the military definitely wanted to attack. They wanted to bomb the missile bases, invade, and that would have been World War III. And Kennedy knew it, and it cost him his life, but we were alive because of him. And that's why, it's scary, just scary to think that how almost we had Nixon. He would have probably done it too. That election was amazing. But that's fate, I think. It was meant to be for a reason. And you can play it over, and you can play it over a million times. It's just incredible. And there's still so much there, and so close we came to war. There was a submarine. I think I told you about this, and it had a nuclear missile, and the captain wanted to launch, and the commissar that was on the boat said no. If he had said yes, they'd have launched this missile to attack one of our ships, and that would have been. It was a nuclear missile. It would have been World War III for sure. And somehow and then he shot down that U-2 pilot over Cuba that Kennedy sent. And that could have been World War III, but they wanted to attack as soon as that was shot down, and Kennedy wouldn't let them. They knew he wasn't going to give them Vietnam. They knew he wasn't going to give them war. And he's going back to war, and then he's going to do peace talks with Castro. I mean, those are things they had to kill. The election was coming up, and they'd have had 4 more years of John Kennedy, and 8 years of Bobby Kennedy, and 8 years of Teddy. They had to do it. And then when RFK ran, it was the same thing. Oh no, we're not going to have this again, because he's going to reopen the assassination. He's going to get into all this stuff. So he had to go too. It's just the 60s were an amazing time to live through. I was in college at most of the time in the 60s, and the Kent State thing was going on. Martin Luther King was going on. It was just, but my generation was cared. I mean, that's why those kids at Kent State died. They cared about, they saw what was going on. They saw the evil, and they saw the unfairness to the world, and they tried to change it. Today, they've got video games and cable TV, and they
Podcasts.
podcasts, and the whole threat is that people will read and find out what you and I have found out. That the research that we've done, the books that we've read about the history of how this all came about. They don't want them to know that. And like that guy in Florida, they don't want kids to know the bad stuff. They're just going to tell them Santa Claus stuff. They're going to bar books, burn books, because that's knowledge is power.
I've definitely from the Kennedy assassination picked up a large interest in the 60s and 70s. But a couple of researchers I was talking to about the whole RFK thing and all this, and I just tell them, I was like, I'm a lot less pessimistic than you guys are, very optimistic about things. I just think that when we want change or we want to talk about getting I just want a government accountability, or if anything, the bare minimum, just define your terms, please. Like, just define national security for me. If we can define it, then I can make sure you don't just label everything national security. We can put it in a pile and we can talk about some real serious ethical concerns. But, I don't know. I'm a pessimist when it comes to actually people defining things and being able to change it, because we haven't done it in the past. There's been plenty of investigations and moments for it.
I'm glad you're optimistic, but I'm not.
I said pessimistic. That's not being optimistic.
Pessimistic. I agree with you.
I don't think we're ever going to get change on
this.
The
reason is this: the country is divided, and it's never going to heal. The Civil War is not over. They should have let the South secede back in 1860s, and they want to do it now. Let them go, because the division in the country is so deep that we're not the United States. We're the ununited States. We're not, pledge allegiance to the flag. We're not indivisible or divisible. I just don't see hope unless, there were two countries, because it's really two completely different worlds that are living together. And
I don't think you need all that. I just think you need to step away from the two-party system for a minute and realize that there's a severe government corruption that has no ideas of two-party systems.
Yeah, well, we'll never have more than the two-party. And the whole point of the two-party system is to make you think you have a choice.
Yeah.
And it's an illusion. You don't really have a choice. I mean, they pick the people that are going to run, and they come from Yale, or they're part of this counterculture, this secret culture, the Bushes and those people. They pick who's going to run. You don't, okay, hey, guess what? You have a choice. You can get this guy or this guy. It's not a choice. You just think you have a choice.
The illusion of choice.
I voted for Bobby Kennedy in the primaries in 68. My first vote, I was 20, 21, 22. I just finally got to vote, and I went and voted for Bobby Kennedy. And then, of course, he was assassinated, and and so then every election since then, I have voted against somebody. In other words, I haven't voted. If I voted for somebody, it wasn't because I liked them or wanted them to be president. It's because the other guy was worse. I always voted for the lesser of two evils in every election since then. That's the only election that I voted for the guy I thought would be the best for the job. Then it was either, Nixon or this guy, or this guy or this guy. And that's sad, to me.
Or just vote independent. It doesn't always have to be lesser of two evils.
Yeah. But then I did that. I even wrote in somebody one time because I hated both of the guys. And that's a waste of your vote. I voted for
That's what I hate. I hate that because that's like my family's all voted mostly. Well, at least the people I respect in it have voted independent, which to me is like, yeah, why don't you just that?
yeah. Well, I
Yeah,
mean, I understand that was my thinking. I'm voting for who I want, and that's my right, and that's wonderful. He's an independent candidate, and I think he's great. But there's no chance in hell he's going to win.
that's why you should vote him is the fact that everyone says that response that there's no way in hell. I was like, well, if everybody does it, then what's going to happen? If everybody goes, I voted this person, you're going to have a bunch of dead people voting for whoever they're going to pick anyway. So I just go, at that point, you should question that notion. Why don't we question more of these things?
Morally, it's right. It's the right thing to do. But you're not affecting the election in any way. That's all.
It's not an answer to me.
Okay.
It's literally it's legit. I understand the whole point of like it's not that voting independent's like wasting your vote, but I'm like we should challenge that notion of why is it wasting a vote? Why do we have that?
And
Answer
there's
to
no
that.
way a third party could compete financially with the powers that
You can back them in a fundraiser if everybody in the world or United States does it.
takes millions and millions of dollars to get a candidate elected,
It only takes $1 from every American.
Yeah, but when you got half of them, the other that think different from you, you're not going to get
I just want to
it.
challenge the system a little bit. Like I feel like nobody else is noticing it but me, but we're a society that wants to care about social problems, but we're also in a capitalistic system right now. And it's been running that way for good reason for a while. But the bad part is it's not spreading the equality aspects of the money to the people that are living in this country. It's getting harder for us, and the elites are getting richer. So challenge the basic notions. There's a bunch of things out there that don't make sense, but we just continue to abide by them. I'm not saying tear up the system or anything. I'm
Federal
just,
Reserve,
but there's like,
for one.
we all know something that, in our opinion, does not work. So if we just kind of look at stuff and we start questioning things more, but we've lost the aspect of questioning. Why can't we just choose a third party?
I
Because they'll
think the
never win.
main, I think the main problem, from my point of view, is lobbies. What we've got is we've got bribery, legal bribery. Uh, Powerful people, organizations like NRA can buy congressmen and get them to vote the way they want. And if you try to bribe a congressman, you go to jail. He goes to jail. But if a lobbyist does it, it's the same thing, but it's legal. In other words, I'll give you I'll buy you a car. I'll get you a beachfront lawn if you support whatever lobby I'm from. If you support our organ, it's bribery. It's legal. It's bribery. And so, how are you going to get? All right, let's say take for example gun legislation.
No, I get lobbying. I know what lobbying is. I understand that
The gun
completely.
legislation, congressmen are not going to pass any bill, hardly any bill. They might pass some small ones because they're supported by these lobbies like the NRA. It's got tons of money, and if they don't support them, they'll get their people to not vote for
Again,
them.
where my pessimism comes in is the fact that this happened with Hollywood back in the day, and it's probably still happening in some aspects. I mean, the government can still influence movies today with equipment and tech battleship, those types of things. The naval ships that they had. Top Gun was a good example that came out, and everyone found out that the government was influencing movies. Like, there's a lot of things that we need to separate from our government and separate from things for a good reason is that it influences not only us, but our kids.
Yeah.
So you just get into that. Like, that's all my whole point is like, if we can start defining terms, if you had another church committee to expose things, there's things that we would not care about. Wiretapping, bro, we all have cell phones in our pockets. They're going to do that anyway. We've accepted that. It's normal now. But there's real things like academic influence on campuses, influence into research studies that the CIA can do and other government capitalistic systems can do as well too. That's like my whole thing is like there's like a real clear out we need to do about some serious ethical concerns. And I think that would help us get at least a little bit better on the right track. But the sad thing is it's very profitable. And asking someone to give up that profit is, a big deal. So yeah, I think you have to force that. You'd have to do a clear out of some real government institutions and other things as well too, and cut off some bad bad buds. But I'm like I said, when you ask someone who's going to do that, everyone's got incentive. The right and the left have an incentive to get what they want across. The right thinks that the agenda's been hijacked by the left. The left thinks their agenda is being pushed down by the right. And it's like, I mean, standing from an impartial view on both sides, it's a little bit of both. I see the right gets, I guess, labeled a certain direction, and the left gets a little bit coverage more on media in my aspect of things. I've noticed that the left, Anderson Cooper and all these big names, they usually are sprouting pretty progressive stuff, which is fine. I don't really care. But it starts to be like you're all pointing fingers at each other. And it's like, that's not the purpose here. You got to turn those fingers a little bit outer and realize that it's the giant system, the people that are at the heads of those that you never see on TV. I'm not saying it's Illuminati stuff, but my idea of an Illuminati would be like our agencies. They have so much power, and I can't tell you what half of them do. Just ask them the basic question, what do you do? And they'll say, well, we're Federal Bureau of Investigation. We investigate problems that happen domestically. I'm like, but what is that? Define that, please. Because if you're paying, like, I think it was just last year, I think they paid over a total of like $180 million from like the past 5 years or 6 years or something like that we found out last year for FBI informants. What are you doing? Like, that's what I want to know is what are you invading that you think is a domestic terroristic problem, and what are you defining as domestic terrorism? Because anything, me saying that we need to talk about the deep state and all this could be domestic terrorism. The way that you view it as a danger to your business financial interests or anything could be a threat to you. Anybody can take anything as a threat, much like we can sue anybody. So I'm not like trying to like ask for a whole lot, but asking, these agencies and other things that we have in our government that just have acronyms, and you ask someone what they do, they don't know what they do. There's other like 16 something agencies that don't even know the acronyms for. I just know the DOD, the CIA, the FBI, and the NSA, but I couldn't tell you what the other ones are doing. I don't even know what their job is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Hoover started that. They had, more FBI informants in the American Communist Party than there were Communist Party members. And they were paying, they were,
My
the
damn
Communist
tax
Party was,
dollars.
the Communist Party was surviving on money that the FBI was donating membership fees. I mean, it wouldn't have existed probably, but Hoover was obsessed with it. And so it's one man has too much power. It was Hoover, But we need to do other things. That when Reagan took out that fairness doctrine, and now things like Fox News are happening, and they can go on TV and lie, and as long as people believe it, that's what's dividing the country more than anything. We need fairness doctrine. We need, okay, you can say stuff if you have proof. You can't just go out and
You
and
can't
say anything you want.
you can't take out free speech. You really can't. And them creating a disinformation board.
Knowingly lie.
Well, that's the thing is who everyone knowingly lies. Both media outlets do. Fox News
But they're
does, CNN
saying that
does.
it's truth. They're
Everyone
saying,
does that though, and they get out of the lawsuits by calling themselves entertainment, the same classification as WWE. I mean, if we talk about COVID information, if we talk about any information, you label something misinformation, and half of that stuff that was labeled misinformation is now being used by the CDC or
well,
WHO.
what's the difference between that and Pravda? It's
Explain.
propaganda. It's all propaganda.
Everything is propaganda. Everyone's got some type of inner message or something that they're trying to send out there or display their perspective and viewpoint. And I mean, we all do it at times. It's a human trait and things of this. But limiting of speech and censorship is my biggest issue because you can't do that. The only way to find out who's got the truth is by having the conversation and talking about
They're
it.
doing it in Florida
With what?
with books and with
Oh,
what can be taught in schools and what can't be taught in
I think
schools.
they're doing that kind of everywhere, isn't it?
Oh, it's really worse there.
Didn't they
It's
throw out a bunch of Tom Sawyer books too?
turning into a fascist state down there. I mean, they can't. Black history's gone. And next it'll be the Holocaust didn't happen.
Well,
Civil War did.
I don't think that's the United States problem. I think that's a governor problem.
Yeah, well, that is.
You got to fix that guy.
DeSantis is the next fascist. I mean, he's worse than anybody. What he's doing to that state,
I've been stuck in the 60s and 70s. I can't help you there. I haven't checked any modern stuff out for a while.
Yeah. Well, the 60s is a good place. There was more history in that decade than
There's just so much. That counterculture revolution or movement that was going on had so many aspects to it. And it's interesting, the people I've interviewed on it or just conversated with, they always say, like, in hindsight, looking back on it, we did some wrong too, and they did some wrong. And it was like just looking at it from both those perspectives is just so interesting because you can see them as a threat or you can see them as a fix. It just, how are they going about their actions of doing so? I mean, it was just a crazy era to be. I mean, I was
the
like a
big
time machine.
big thing about what caused all that was the Cold War, I think. And it comes out of when the war was winding down, and we thought that the Russians were going to, communism was going to take over Europe, and domino effect all over the world. That it was such a paranoia with intelligence agencies and with British and America in particular, and Dulles was in that up to his neck. The OSS, Donovan and them guys were into that. They said, okay, we've got Germany licked, but Soviet Union is a real danger now. It's a real threat. So they left behind this, Dulles' left behind army, the Gladio program. They had Gladio, and they kept this underground army in Europe to stop the Russians if they invaded or whatever. And they started out sabotage and this and that, and then it escalated. It started in Italy when the Communist Party in Italy got very strong after the war, and so the CIA set up a program in Italy where they took these Gladio program and turned it into terrorism and assassination, and they were killing leaders from the communist parties and blowing things up and fixing elections to get the right wing parties in, and that's one of the things that Bill Harvey was sent to Rome, and he was involved in that, and that they had to finance that army, and they didn't know how to finance it, and they came up with what Chiang Kai-shek was doing in China, which was drugs. They were using opium and stuff to finance military operations. So they came up with this program and they got involved with the mafia. They got involved with Trafficani and all these guys, and they started to import drugs into the United States, and they sent them to Harlem. And their thinking was, well, white middle class America won't get into heroin and that stuff. The blacks will do it. So they sold it on the streets cheap, and they got all
Yeah.
these addicts in Harlem, and particularly the jazz musicians, like Billie Holiday and
Yeah.
those guys. They got them all hooked on drugs. And now that drug problem has expanded all over the country and the world. And that's how they financed all these covert operations. Well, that led to everything that happened after that. It led to the McCarthy era and communist, under every bedpost. And then anything became fair to stop it. They saw this communists under the bed. They were everywhere in the country. They were in the government. They were in big business. They were in the military. And we had to stop it, and we used any means possible, including assassination. So they saw Kennedy pretty much as friendly to communism. He was helping them. He was,
Yeah. I've
he
done a
was
couple
dangerous.
episodes on the drug stuff before, but
Yeah. But that's, that Gary Webb was going to expose this, and he was killed. He was exposing that CIA was, that's what Iran-Contra was about. We were sending weapons over there and bringing back drugs from Vietnam. They hooked our soldiers on it in Vietnam.
well, before we start going into a bunch of different stuff, and I think that's a lot for one episode, but no, Gary, I'll have you back on to talk about that a little bit too. I got some people we could do a panel about that. But where can people find your links, Gary? You giving me enough of your time, man. I always enjoy talking with you.
Yeah. It's my website's the otheroswald.com, all one word. Uh, and it's mostly about Webster, but there's a little bit of everything up there. And I have some essays that I wrote on different areas of the assassination. Uh, and I'm working on another thing now, another book. I'm in the research stage, but it's still that far back. But I'm using a lot of this new materials that are coming out that are every time we get a load of these, we get a couple pieces
Yeah.
to the puzzle. You see that, and you have to have proof for stuff. You can't just assume this happened and that happened and this happened, because we weren't there and we didn't see it, and we need to. And best proof is those documents. What that are there, and so we need to get them all released. And I have to give you praise for your efforts in Out of the Blank. I think it's great. I think you've done a lot for the research community and give people a chance to go and see different points of view on different subjects, all related to this area of the Cold War. And I just for your age, you're amazing.
Thanks,
I
Gary.
really think that. And I'm so impressed. When you first asked me, who's this guy? Who's this young kid? What's he know? I spent 50 years researching this stuff, and it's young kids. And I'm just amazed at how much you know and how much you've learned and how fast you learn. And you give me new hope for this generation, because I, thought nobody cares anymore. They're
I think
preoccupying them with other things like
video games and all that. I think they'll a lot of people that I know that are my age that listen to this and listen to a lot of my JFK episodes. They've definitely had questions. People I even work with that'll ask me questions. What about this and this and this? I don't have all the answers, and I don't think everyone has any answers a whole lot to everything. But it just goes into you're able to piece with very simple stuff that there is something fishy going on here. And with that stamina or that momentum, we can go a little bit more forward into getting the public in on this discussion, which I think is highly important. I mean, despite whoever you think did it, let's just focus on the things that we can prove with evidence and documentation that they have admitted to, and showing the public they have said this themselves, that this wasn't done right and this wasn't done right. So once they can see that, then they can get on board and we can hopefully get some answers out. But
You're right. You're right.
wishful thinking.
No one knows everything about it. No one has the solution. And when somebody says they do, then you should be wary. But everybody can contribute something, and people like Jefferson Morley, I think, are really making a difference. He's I respect him as a researcher, as he's doing lawsuits and things to get information that we need to get, and not many people do that, and that's good. But everyone can contribute something. Now, my contribution is probably Robert Webster, because no one up to this point had really spent much time and getting into his, what happened with him. And I only did that because I found out he lived 20, 40 miles from me, and that just made it interesting. I got to know more about this guy. And it led to a lot of stuff that the research community didn't have. Now they have a source where they can go and find out about who Robert Webster was, you know. And so that was my contribution. Somebody else contributed. Larry Hancock's contributed a lot about the Cuban thing and various different things. And Bill Simpich has contributed a lot because he's involved with the documents. He's a document lawyer, and he's constantly sending me documents and stuff that I'm amazed he gets. But yeah, I mean, we all have to work together instead of fighting each other. It's the division thing again. We got to be, and that's what I kind of hate, is how researchers tend to fight and take different sides instead of working together and saying, all right, well, this is let's find out what this, if this is true or not, or that's true or not, and go from there. And we need to do that. We need to work together because there's too much junk out there. People like James Files, for instance, I don't believe him at all. And he's writing books and saying he shot Kennedy, and people believe it. I don't believe it. But there's a lot of that stuff. There's a lot of books like that. We need to quit that and find out what's true and go from there. That's it.
I agree. And I'm going to link all your links in the description, Larry. Not Larry, Gary. He said Larry and I got the names mixed up. It would have been even worse if we got another panel together. I would have been calling you guys left and right. But
you have to get people with names like Larry, Gary, Mary, get a whole bunch of them.
I had both Gary Schoner and Gary Severson on, and I was like, oh God, I don't even know if I'm saying the names.
Gary Sean, Gary Mack.
But I'll link all your links in the description, Gary. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, and thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank Podcast.